Ashley. Welcome to Keep What You Earn.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I'm excited for this conversation. I've been waiting for this one. I look forward to all my guests, but there are just some topics where I'm just going, ooh, I can't wait to dig into this one. And we're going to talk TED Talks, TEDx Talks, all the things. But Ashley, could you just introduce yourself real quick to those listening and let them know what it is you do?
Yeah, my name's Ashley Stahl. I am a top 100 TEDx speaker on the internet, and TEDx totally changed my life, and so much so that I created a whole company around TEDx. And I'm actually proudly not affiliated with TED or TEDx because the brands themselves, they don't love the idea of entrepreneurs giving talks on their platform with the intention of getting some benefit from it. But I love entrepreneurs giving talks and getting benefit from it. So we have Wise Whisper Agency. We've written and we've booked more than 100 TEDx talks, and we've secured more than 100 people on stage for TEDx with nearly 100% success.
That's amazing. And just right out the gate, I want to make sure if listeners are thinking about, oh, wow, a TEDx talk, like, can I actually do that? How, like, what is the process to start doing this? I'm sure they have so many questions on that. Could we just explain the difference between like a TED talk, TEDx talk, and a little bit up behind the scenes on really how you get in the room for these types of things?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people find TED and TEDx as a platform pretty elusive. And there's a really big difference between the two. So, we were talking about this before we recorded that TED is pretty much invite only. You see Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, people like that on the Elon Musk on the TED stage. TEDx is licensed out by TED. Pretty much anyone can decide that they want to contact TED and apply to be a TEDx event. It costs money, it costs sponsors, it costs time, it costs volunteers. But there's up to 13,000 TEDx events around the world. And some of them have bigger licenses than others, meaning that they have bigger audience sizes because the TED brand trusts them with a bigger audience. And so at any given time, there might be 1,000 or 2,000 TEDx events that are active around the world. And my team's expertise is that we have a Rolodex of TEDx curators that love our speeches. And our expertise is not just writing the speech, but getting people booked on the TEDx stage. What I think is really powerful about TED versus TEDx is that consumers don't really know the difference between the two brands. The brand authority and credibility is seen very much as the same. And so there's power in that. And I think entrepreneurs are often high achievers. So a lot of clients will come into our company and say, how do I get the best TEDx event? And I explain to them, it doesn't really matter if you're at TEDx San Francisco or TEDx Timbuktu, as long as the stage looks respectable and you get your YouTube clip, it's hitting the TEDx channel. And I always remind clients, like, it's not just a TEDx talk, it's a YouTube talk. If you really look at it, YouTube owns the house and TEDx is the bouncer at the door of the party, right? So when you think about TEDx, and if you're familiar with the brand technology, education, design, TED, people think a lot about the one idea worth spreading. And that's the messaging that TED and TEDx give is, what is your one idea worth spreading? I actually really loathe that question of what is your one idea worth spreading? I think it's a cool question if you're a business person to kind of know, do you have a one idea worth spreading? Do you have a soundbite? That's really useful if you do a lot of PR. That's really useful for people to understand your brand. But if you take a really talented person that's full of content and you look at them and say, what's your one idea worth spreading? I think you're robbing that person of an opportunity to actually say, here's all of the areas that I have expertise. And that's what we really want to know. Because it's more of a YouTube talk than a TEDx talk, we want to know what's your best content, right? Like, and I don't want to distract people by saying, what's your one idea? So instead, when we have a client come in, we'll say, what do you want out of this? What do you want this TEDx talk to do? My TEDx talk, both of them, I have two, brought me more than $3 million in coaching revenue over 10 years. So my business I had consistent book sales, consistent podcast listenership, more consulting opportunities than I could have ever imagined. And it really changed my life, which is why I love what we're doing. But we ask people, what do you want out of this? How do you want to be positioned if this thing goes viral, which a lot of the talks we're writing do? And okay, great. If you want this goal, who's the ideal customer you want to attract? Who's the ideal lead you want to attract? Okay, great. Granted, I would say maybe half of our clients are just doing this out of legacy. They don't even want leads. They're like the wise owl that just wants to give a message to the world. The other half want to skyrocket their leads and their income from this. So they'll say, oh, I want more coaching clients, or I want more people to buy my product, or I want more book sales, or whatever it is. I want to be seen as a top rated speaker. Doing a TED or a TEDx talk seems to be a given these days if you want to have a speaking career. And so I'll say, okay, great. What topic positions you as that person? If you're a leadership coach, maybe it's burnout. If you are a doctor that owns a bunch of vision clinics, then obviously eyesight is going to be your topic. And then our deeper question is, what is your most original thinking on this topic? What are the thoughts that you share with your customers, with your clients, with the world, that you see people really lock in with you? That's what we want to know. What's your most original thinking? Because the reality is we can write a TEDx script with very original thinking, and we could look at it like, looking at the forest from the trees and say, oh, this is the message. This is the one idea we're really seeing here. And then we can kind of enter YouTube's house party and satisfy TEDx at the door and give them their one idea we're spreading. So we give them those things, but we don't lead with those things when we're thinking about it, because we find that their demands are not designed for, how we want to do things.
Yeah, and when I think about, I've consumed a lot of these talks too, and when I think about it, it's usually a alternative way of thinking about something is how it's positioned, and it's usually intriguing and provoking curiosity, which I think aligns with what you're saying on, like the algorithms of YouTube spreading it. It's like, oh, this is an interesting. It's almost like a hook in the name of the talk, and thinking about what types of ideas do you want to evoke out of the person watching it. Not just will it satisfy the theme of whatever the event is or appease the host, right? You're looking
Right.
at what is the audience member going to get out of this?
Yeah, exactly. And what do you want from it for yourself, right?
Right.
Like, who do you want? And there's a couple things people need to think about. First of all, TEDx and TED, they both have a lot of guidelines. Again, I don't know if this is like a lawyery thing for me to say. I'm not affiliated with TEDx, but I've just studied their guidelines. We've never had one of our clients' talks get taken down. People's talks get taken down all the time if you misunderstand their guidelines. So,
Hmm.
number one, self-promotion. If you self-promote too hard, you're going to get taken down. Like, you got to be mindful. There's two different ways people self-promote. One way is kind of the cheap way, which, no judgment, I hate to say the word cheap, it's just that's how we talk on my team. Cheap self-promotion is being like, as the founder of Wise Whisper Agency, like saying something like that on the TEDx stage, as
Hmm.
a doula for women that have babies, like, I don't, that's
Yeah.
just a quick little conjunction of saying what you do. That's a cheap shot. It's not going to
The
work
verbal
well.
banner.
It's
Yeah.
verbal banner. A better way of doing it. We had a client who opened up a bank, and his entire story and his entire life story landed into him now being someone who opened up a bank, his first bank. So it's almost like his story brought him into his self promotion, and it makes sense, and it's required for him to say what he's doing in order for people to complete the story that he's telling. So he talked about being a little kid and not money and all this stuff. And now he, because of all these discriminations that happened to him, now he's an adult and he opened his first bank with new set of rules, right? It's like now people know he owns a bank. So
Yeah.
I think it's about being strategic in your self promotion. It's not to say that if you say, as a business coach, you're going to get taken down, but you're definitely risking it for a biscuit. So it's up to you.
But I think
The
there's a
second,
way to alternatively articulate that to say, after speaking with dozens of clients or after like using it to back up the statements that you're making as a credibility source as opposed to self-promotion, there's a blurry line there, but I think that you can toe that line pretty intentionally to make sure it's bolstering the point and adding value to give this, like you said, the story closure,
yeah,
or to bolster up what you're saying to be able to back it up with stats or back it up with experience and anecdotes and storytelling to be able to make a point.
exactly. And on top of that, what's even more important than that is science. Like,
Yeah.
especially like if you're like a beverage CEO and you're really into health, you are not a PhD, you are not a doctor, you are not a researcher. And even if you are, so that alone means that you need to put more research in your talk. For every talking point, you need to back it with somebody else's credible research. But not only that, the TEDx platform very quickly considers things pseudoscience if they're not widely accepted science. So any research you share needs to be very strategically thought out. You need to share credible sources. We have a lot of doctors that come in and they maybe have a New York Times bestselling book, but the research that they're sharing in their book is new. It's not widely accepted science. So I have to tell those clients, hey, we're not going to share one sentence about that research.
Yeah. And I love all of this too, because it makes you think about, wow, there's a lot that goes into this. It's actually a complicated recipe for a TED Talk. It's not as
Yeah.
simple as talking about something you know off the cuff. Definitely not. But I want to go back to in your examples here in your TED Talks, you know, Ashley, how did you, number one, you know, you were not a, I'm assuming you were not a TEDx coach at the time you released both
Yeah.
talks, or were you at any point? Um, like this was when you had your coaching business, but maybe not on the subject of TED, right?
Yeah, and I still don't even see myself as a TEDx coach, which is so funny because people have been like, "You're a TEDx coach." I'm like, "But am I? Like, I don't even know what I am." I feel like I own a
Right.
speech writing house. We're really good at writing
Mm,
speeches. That's what we're doing.
right.
Um, and so that's kind of like where my time, energy, love, attention has been.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as why I'm doing this, I had a career coaching business for 10 years and I told every single client, you've got to do a TEDx talk. And that's how I started this business was
Right.
I first I thought I wish I could write these, but I don't know. It's a kind of a weird market. Like, how do I find people right when they get booked for TEDx and then they need it written? Feels like a hard chase, like to find my clients. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But I told all my career coaching clients, like, you've got to do one of these. So write it if you want, use however many sessions with me if you want. I'm really good at these. And so a lot of clients would walk away with them. And I knew a booker who would book the talks and I would connect them to them. And after 40 clients being connected to my booker, it became clear she booked 39 out of the 40 referrals that I sent her. And that was when I was like, oh, and the one person she couldn't book, her English wasn't really strong. And she was Italian, and her Italian was like, it was just so choppy to understand her speaking the speech. The feedback we got from the curators was, we love her talk, but we're really struggling to understand. Um, and so that was the eye opener for us. That was the, okay, clearly, clearly we're, needing to just make sure people have, enough clarity on their English. So we pretty much bat 100%. And that was when I put it together as a business and started Wise Whisper Agency was, all right, great. I have this booker. I absorbed her team and her. And now we are a completely done for you service. And over the course of 4 Zoom calls, we write and we book your TEDx talk. You just have to show up 4
Wow.
times. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean,
And
a speech takes anywhere from 40 to 80 hours to write, and booking can take 200 hours to do. So it's a beast of a project, but we just take the magic out of the client and go do it.
I love that because you know what to extract. Like you know
Yeah.
what elements of it are really important and which is like, okay, but let's focus on this. I think what you provide a lot of is that focus of
Yeah.
this is what to spend your time on and this is what not to spend time on so people don't
Yeah.
waste time.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of people, because it's such a big deal for them energetically, they don't realize how small of a speech it is. Like TED Talks are anywhere from 6 to 18 minutes. Most of them come in at around 10 to 12 minutes. That's 3 to 4 pages. So you have to be really mindful. And we are, from a speech writing perspective, the structure of a speech. Um, so yeah, those are things that
Yeah.
I think are really important.
I think it's super hard to write a short speech
Yeah.
because when you have it sounds funny to say, I find it easier to write for an hour than to write for 10 minutes because,
Yeah.
well, number one, especially if you have to script it fully, it sounds like, oh, it's easier to memorize a 10-minute maybe than an hour, maybe. But there's really like no room for deviating from the core course because it's like we
Yeah.
have 10 minutes to get this done. Like, no ad-libbing, no distraction, no, there's bumper lanes that we have to put in place, right, to make sure we're on the right path,
Right.
and a lot to cram in there, especially
Yeah.
if you have a lot of goals for your TED Talk. What do you recommend people do when, how can they extract a really clear goal and message and, like you said, idea worth spreading? What does that process look like in terms of getting that down to a more narrow focus? Because I imagine if people have a
Yeah.
lot of things they can talk about. How do you extract that, like,
Yeah.
core thing at the center of it?
Beneath every piece of content is a theme, is
Mhm.
a tone, right? So, um, you could be a doctor and you want to talk about gut health, and I can say, okay, well, what are some points that you want the world to know about gut health? But once we take a zoom out of the speech and the content, and what is your best 3 thoughts about gut health, and what story can we open up with that has to do with a patient and what they went through with their gut and how you help them, is taking a look and seeing a theme. One theme I saw with this particular talk, for example, is trusting yourself. Um, a lot of Once we looked at the talk, it was like there was a lot of comments about like science works slow, but logic works fast. And if your logic is telling you that something's wrong with your health, you need to listen to yourself. So listening to yourself became a theme that we peppered throughout the talk. And it was like a two-dimensional thing, right? One dimension is the content and the tips and the tactical and the education. The other dimension is the spiritual, the poetry, the meaning, the reflection parts. And I'm constantly training my speechwriters to make sure that they capture that second half of it, because there's too many talks out there that are like, here's the 3 steps, and they're not hitting anybody's soul. And if you can't make people feel something, you're not going to go viral and you're not going to get the result you want. Slash, like, what's the point of life if you can't make people feel something? It just
Right.
feels like, what are we all doing here?
And I think that's also why people enjoy the TED Talks and they'll
Yeah.
watch them because they extract something of it of value that's beyond the education. Because I think I've seen a lot of people produce, very educational, very scientific TED Talks, but then I go, yes, but we have to keep it not boring. Even though it's short, we have to keep it really interesting and turn it into a story and a narrative that people want to bring it to closure, or they just want to keep listening, keep watching. Because even though it's a short talk, I mean, attention spans are insanely short to hold an audience and to make sure they're still captivated, right?
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
My attention span included. And I think that's why the opener is one of the most important parts of going viral, is being able to like really move people and grab them on the outset. And too many TEDx speakers are starting conversationally, and the problem there is if you share a shocking statistic, that's going to grab people's attention, but then you got to keep it. And a story can keep it more than like a conversation after you share a statistic, unless the stat is super relevant to everybody listening and you're explaining and making sense of it in a way that other people are thirsty to know for their own well-being.
Yeah, or there's a loop, right? Where if like
Yeah.
you share a statistic from the past and then one of the current, now there's a closed loop of like, now we have a whole story here from start to finish.
Yeah.
And I think that's an impactful part of it. But if you're just sharing a stat and then making a point,
Yeah.
you kind of like, that's where
You
it
lose your
ends.
people. Exactly.
Yeah,
100%. Mhm.
becomes a short-term burst.
Yeah.
No, I love this. I love how like scientific it is, because I think people, let's just bust a myth right now that, when we see TED speakers, TEDx speakers, we see them on YouTube and we go, wow, that feels really unapproachable to me because I don't think I'm good at this. They must be really good speakers or professional speakers. Can we talk about like the skill side of it, of who you work with, and like, do they come in kind of preloaded with speaking skills, or do you help them with that? Or is this like we recommend that you have a certain amount of experience before exploring the TEDx stage?
Yeah, no, I mean, anybody can really do a TEDx talk. I try not to say it that way because we do pre-screen our clients that come in. Like, we've really trained our sales team to like really take a look at it. Look, they have a TEDx kids. Like, there's
Mhm.
kids giving TEDx talks. They haven't lived as much life, right? So I think the thing is, number one, did this person have a story? And if they don't, that's okay. We can pull stories out. Everybody has stories, and we're artists, right? Like, my writers are, my creative director, was assisting Steve Jobs in making his decks, and she wrote speeches for his executive team. So she's directing the TEDx talks. Our writers have all written and sold movies and TV shows and, New York Times bestselling books. So like, we can pull a story out of air, but there needs to be continuity. You can't be like an energy healer that wants to do an energy healing. Well, that's going to be seen as pseudoscience. So that's a topic of its own. But you can't be like an energy healer wanting more coaching clients, but you work at a tech startup. Like, the curators need to see continuity in what you're talking about and who you present yourself as on the internet. That is definitely required.
Yeah, I love that. That it's more like, are you telling a consistent story,
Yeah.
basically?
Yeah.
I love that. And going more into like the tactics of getting on that TEDx stage and what it takes to write and deliver the talk. I know you mentioned how many hours go into this. Um, Talk to me about how, how your customer, how the speaker is spending their time in terms of what's expected of them and what they can expect out of the process of applying for getting on the TEDx stage and then delivering that speech. Like, what does that journey look like for your customer?
Yeah. That's a really, really good question. So, as far as like how we work with them,
Yeah, and like what they, their side of this experience, because maybe they're not as experienced. You guys have done this on repeat. You have a recipe almost to follow where you know exactly what to extract, but maybe this is new for them and new for someone
Yeah.
listening. What
Yeah.
can they expect working with you guys and from this experience of having their own talk?
Yeah, great question. I would say, anybody who comes in to work with us, we have a really in-depth intake form. I actually, if I could check right now, I'm pretty sure it's at wisewhisperagency.com/intake. And the
Hmm.
reason I'm mentioning that, I'm checking right now my own intake form. The reason I'm saying that is because yep, we have it there. A lot of audiences have noticed when I communicate about our intake form that it's pulled a lot out of clients. And a lot of clients have said, wow, that intake form was so reflective for me that I'm using stories you pulled out of me from that in my speaking career to come. So whether you work with us or not, you could check out our intake form over there. That might help you in some way start to think about your stories and how you want to structure your TED Talk. Once we get the client's intake form, we work over 4 90-minute Zoom calls. The first call is really brainstorming, what topic are you doing? What's this about for you? What do you want from the talk? Where do you have your most original thinking? And what story from your intake form feels like the best opening for the TEDx talk? We take a couple of weeks, we go write it. And then we come back to you in Zoom call 2. We get your feedback on your opening story. We brainstorm your talking points a little bit further. And then we go take a stab at that. And then we meet you in the third Zoom call and we rip through it together. We also take in 5 hours of content. If you've written a book, if you've done blog posts, podcasts, you want to send it to us and you determine it's relevant for your talk, we get that done for you. And then after that, we go implement all of your suggestions from the third Zoom call. That brings us to the fourth one, which is the final draft. We do all the final edits there, and then we hand it off to our booking team. The fastest we've ever booked somebody is in 2 days,
Wow.
another one in 6 weeks. But the slowest we've ever booked somebody is in 24 months. It can be very slow. Our commitment is we pitch you until we pretty much book you. Um, so, some clients are getting second rounds, third rounds, fourth rounds, whatever, in order to get booked. So we do need clients that want to show up and be present. Um, it's funny, we just had to put that in our contract. Like we had a couple clients that just showed up for second rounds, like, oh, I was jet lagged, I was late, I la la la. We're like, okay, these are hard to get, these second round interviews, but we get them. And then from there, once you're booked, we hand you off to your curator, and you have usually 2 to 3 months leading up to the event. Some clients just invest in us writing and booking their talk for them. Some invest in us writing and booking the talk and providing them a speaking coach, PowerPoint slides, their YouTube bio that goes beneath, title suggestions that are SEO optimized. So we do it all. And we actually have a ads team that guarantees over 1 million views of ideal clients that are watching your talk, which is a pretty significant investment to invest in that kind of guarantee. But we're really here to, I don't know, like really help transform people's brands, get their voice out there. I think as somebody who's been a content creator for years, I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on PR firms and they haven't really moved the needle in my brand like TEDx. So we're really just bread and butter with TEDx. It's a one-stop shop.
Yeah, I mean, even you can even leverage the
Yeah,
TEDx content, right? If you want to post more content on, say, social media, you can keep reusing that content as well. With those beautiful red letters behind you, it does add credibility in that background just in and of itself, saying, "Oh, she's been on TED." That's a huge brand builder. And I agree. I think there's a massive ROI in that experience just because of the credibility that that brand holds. And I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
exactly. I remember when I started Wise Whisper Agency having some regret, like, man, I'm so late to start this. TEDx has been so cool for so long. Because when you think of an idea and you're like, where was this idea all along? This is what my
Hmm.
calling is. This is what I really should be doing right now. And I just realized now I'm like, we're pretty much the only company truly doing this because it's really hard to get booked, and our booker just has so much experience. And she's working pretty exclusively with us. And so we're just lucky. We're a very unique
Yeah.
business. But that's the thing I've realized. I'm like, this platform is going nowhere. Like this
Yeah.
is incredibly useful.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't matter. Let's talk about the different goals that you can help them accomplish with TEDx? Because you mentioned that it really depends on what the goal is of the person. It could be more leads, which I think will happen for a lot of business owners, including those listening. Are there any other specific goals that people come to you with that maybe you should consider a TEDx talk if these sound like your goals?
I mean, anyone who's making a career pivot, TEDx is amazing. It's a good way to put your shingle in the ground. And granted, I know that I said you need to have continuity, so it can't be a pivot that's like completely out there. Um, I think another thing is anyone who um, wants to be established as a speaker, wants to get out of corporate and have a speaking career, anyone who wants consistent lead generation, amplify your authority, leave a legacy, skyrocket the amount of opportunities coming in. I think the thing that is most powerful about TED and TEDx that I don't talk about enough is what mysticism it's added to my career. Like when you put yourself out there, people are watching you every day and they're thinking about things for you that you've never thought of for yourself. And because of that, the talk is inviting opportunities towards you that you didn't even really know existed. And that to me is like one of the most exciting things that I would have never indexed for and that
Yeah.
I'm the most grateful for.
Yeah, that's a really cool element of it. I think a lot of people listening, including myself, will say 2 years ago before I learned more about this, usually think, well, number one, either that is too far out, like inaccessible to me, like the normal person, which I think we've dispelled because TEDx is a lot more approachable with the different programs that are out there. And like you said, there's so many more events and so many other opportunities for you to apply. But then also the thought of, well, what can I share that hasn't already been said this deep into the TED brand, right? Like there's got to be a talk out there already on the thing that I want to say. How do you help people kind of overcome that objection to, well, it's not for me because what new idea can I share?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's been said, but it hasn't been said the way you have to say it. And that is really the most important thing. Like, how you're going to say something is so different than how other people are going to say it. And it's not just that, it's about moving people. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that will give 3 tips on something that you could give 3 tips on. But is your soul really in it when you're getting up there and talking? Are you showing up with real storytelling skills? So yeah, I totally agree that there's tons of people out there, but it's really different when you have a well-written speech. And I think that's one of the things I'm the most proud of is I think I have one of the best teams I've literally ever come across between me having worked in Obama administration, learning speech writing, having 2 viral TEDx talks myself, one in the top 100, our creative director having been as visionary as assisting Steve Jobs for all the years she did at Apple, and then all of our writers. So I think if you have the right team, I mean, obviously, if you don't want to invest in our services, because we're a pretty high end offering, um, I would say at least hire a writer that you think is much better than you to make sure that you are putting the most soul into it that you can.
I totally agree. And when it comes to that storytelling element, I think that that's a like kind of an elusive thing too, because I think it's hard to gauge like how good of a storyteller are you if you haven't had to tell a lot of stories, especially in this type of format. What are some of your best tips on how to extract a really good story or how even to condense it? Because like I said, this is a really short talk and your story has to be really punchy in order for it to really land. What are some of the things that you tell clients when it comes to storytelling? And is that one of the areas that you kind of try to help them with a little bit that may be unfamiliar?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like tips just to pull out people's stories,
Hmm.
I would say the most important thing is to ask yourself what moments in your life. Well, there's a couple questions. Number one, what moments in your life have really impacted the way that you think? Like, what's a memory? What's a moment? What's a conversation? I think the second question to ask yourself is there something that you feel like you really understand about the world? That if other people really got it, the world would be a lot better.
I love that. Is that from the intake form? Because that's really good.
Yeah, that fits in the intake form, girl.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
that's a journal and a half.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I've learned too when it comes to extracting stories, because I've been doing this actively myself too, is that it's not so literal. Like
Yeah,
for me, I'm an accountant, right? And we're so freaking literal and logical
yeah.
by training and by nature. But also I was thinking about literal stories of clients and this and that, and it's like, no, 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 no. Like literally when you went to a certain restaurant with your dad when you were 8, this thing happened, or like you can still make the point with other stories from lived experience that aren't directly related to your business and aren't directly going to communicate an outcome. Like it's not the sales pitch, it's about humanizing you and having people relate to you, right?
And that's actually really hard when you're trying to do it, right? Like our most human moments are not when we're trying to be human, right? So when
Right.
you're writing a speech, it's like you're really trying to capture a soulfulness. And I think that's why speakers like Brene Brown did incredibly well on the platform. She is really conversational, really heartfelt. It feels like she's venting on stage.
Yeah.
That's how real she's
Like a
coming
verbal
across. So
journal.
it's a verbal journal. It's like a reckoning that she's sharing with everybody. And I think people feel those and those hit really powerfully for that reason.
Yeah, and I think that's also what makes it unique because people aren't vocalizing those thoughts in that way. And that's also what brings out a lot of the attraction because people say, yeah, I totally agree with that, but nobody's saying that. And
Exactly.
you know, how we feel when like the one person says the thing we're all thinking.
Yeah.
That's also a really attractive quality about the story too. It's like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what
Yep.
I'm trying to say.
Exactly. I mean, I could go on forever about how to make a relatable story, but I think opening up with something that you're deeply moved by, like we try to be relevant on stage and we forget that relevance really is rooted in resonance. And I get this
Mm.
from my friend Andrea Crowder, who talks about this a lot. What she means by that, what I mean by that is like, let's say you've been like a chef for 10 years and you have a bunch of Instagram followers and you want to get into fitness. Like, you're like, oh, is my audience going to keep following me? Do they care about this? It's like, well, do you resonate with it? Because the reason people were following you in the first place is you were so alive about what you were sharing. And that's what made you relevant. That's what made you relevant for people to follow you, is your aliveness. So I think it's about like really when you're writing stories, when you're thinking about your TED Talk, just being like, do I feel deeply moved by what I'm sharing when I open up? Do I feel my chills? Do I feel my emotions? And if you don't, then you either need help to brainstorm or you just need a new story.
Yeah, I think people misconstrue the speaking for doing like a training
Yeah.
and they think they're talking at the audience and teaching them something. And I'm finding even with, I mean, from the TED stage to even just to content online right now, I'm feeling a shift into that, like you said, it's relatability and the resonance creating relevance
Yep.
because people just want to connect with what the
Yeah.
person's saying as opposed to simply consume some type of training or education. It's like, yeah, I can Google that, I can YouTube these topics, but like why should I listen to you? What is it about your perspective that I should be listening to? And going back to like why you if this has already been said? It's because
Right.
somebody's going to listen because it's your voice.
Exactly. And I think that that's the thing to remember.
I totally agree. Ashley, I know you've talked about like the intake form and how people can get in touch with you. Can you say the URL one more time for those listening in case they want to go
Yeah.
apply and learn more?
Yeah. I love that you were like, what a great question. Is that in the intake form? Like, way to prop me up, Shannon. What a
I know I want
vibe.
to go on the I'm going to go on the dang intake form and just like
Yeah.
reflect on my whole life right now.
Totally. I mean, why not? Like it's a
Right.
really powerful form. So wisewhisperagency.com/intake is where you can see our intake form. Feel free to copy it and make your own copy and work on it. It's just a Google Doc. And if you want to work with us, we're at wisewhisperagency.com in general. You can see what we're doing with TEDx there. If you apply on our website, somebody will get in touch with you to schedule a call. And if you say that you came from Shannon, we want to give you $1,000 off as long as it's in the first 90 days of the episode releasing. So let us know you come from Shannon so that we could give you that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for that, by the way. Let Ashley and her team know that you came from Keep What You Earn, came from my referral. I love what these guys do. I've seen the results of what they can produce with TED. You guys heard it. Like she has a rock star team. This is like
Mhm.
an unreal. I know you say you're lucky. I just say you're really well positioned and it's obvious that
Yeah.
you guys have created a really good culture of these people all on the same mission and that you've built that with a really big intention. So I wouldn't chalk it up to luck. I would say you're
Thanks.
probably really good at what you guys do.
Thank you. I feel that. I think also just TED is such a powerful messenger and legacy platform with 40 million people following you on TEDx and TED that we've been able to get writers that otherwise wouldn't say yes because they're moved by the opportunity to impress their gifts upon the speech and have that extend into the world in such a special way.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost like a piece of artwork that so many different people get to contribute to and are equally proud of. So that's really cool.
Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing it that way too.
Yeah, absolutely love it. I love and the way you talk about it too. Like you said, you light up talking about your team. And that's
Yeah.
really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Guys, listen, if you are interested in working with Ashley and her team, they're phenomenal. Go check out the link in the show notes for that intake form to basically rethink your life and probably cry. I probably would if I got these questions. It's like, wow, this is going deep. And I really appreciate that. Check out their website and learn more about possibly working with them to do your own TEDx talk. Ashley, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.